Welcome to the Rooted Healing podcast, where we seek to deepen our kinship with the living landscapes around us and within us. This is a space where stories heal with words that weave us closer to our wild and interrelational nature, where we explore ways to root down and re-indigenize ourselves to the land, ecosystems, communities, and practices that help us heal, reimagine, and co-create the world we love to be alive in.
What does it mean to connect to nature? What is the invitation, I think, is very much the exact same as what is the invitation to connect to any human. It is the wild relational web of intimacy, of love, of eros, of trust and closeness and sensation, of being vulnerable to be even wounded or hurt by the earth as well. Relationship contains all of these things, not just the good things. And that's how these relational containers can change us and shift us, because we're willing to be so touched.
Lindsay Branham is an eco-doula, an Emmy-nominated filmmaker and social scientist dedicated to leveraging media and technology to end human rights abuses and ecological disconnect. She is the founder of Novo Films, as well as a PhD student at Cambridge University exploring nature connectedness at the somatic sensory level, and she's also an author with a book coming out soon, which we'll talk more about in this episode. She is a Catherine Davis Fellow for Peace and was named the inaugural Envision Social Good Fellow by the Independent Film Project and the United Nations. Lindsay served as a media behaviour change specialist for UNICEF and Search for Common Ground, and was a freelance journalist for CNN and the BBC. Her body of work astounds me. I encourage you to explore her various projects on her website, which I'll link in the show notes. I've watched several of her films. You can head to novofilm.co, as I encourage you to see them for yourself and what the power of narrative can do for local communities in the face of some of the most hard-hitting social injustices upon this earth. Lindsay refers to Angel Kyodo Williams on her website, who says that separation from self, others, and the natural world seed the division and collapse we are living in. Therefore, sustained activism is born from practices of reconnection. And this is clearly Lindsay's driving mission, that of reconnection. She's written, quote, "I see this not as frivolous but essential. I look to deep ecology to create reciprocal relationship, to germinate a coherent foundation for the world that is possible. I must fall in love with the earth. It is both simple and painstakingly difficult. Although love might cost us everything, I keep hearing, go ahead, love anyway. I do not dream of a utopian world. I am remembering a world where nothing is separate, where reciprocity and listening can one day become a shared freedom for all living things." End quote. Oh, this is a good one, folks. Before we jump in, I'd like to let you know that we have 2 spots left on Earth Medicine, our legal psilocybin retreat this October 4th to 10th in the Netherlands. Here are some words from our last immersion in April from Laura Hodge, who attended. Quote, "My Earth Medicine retreat was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. This experience has been life-changing in so many ways. I have a newfound acceptance, peace, and connection to nature and myself that I didn't think was possible. This continues to evolve after returning home. Ronnie, Andrew, Lilia, and Hannah have the most beautiful voices, thank you, and it was such a treat to hear ancient medicine music from the soul. Rooted Healing are a truly special, humble, passionate collective of experts who create magic. They really do make you feel safe, held, and completely at ease. Thank you for your hard work, love, expertise, and passion, and for being such a wonderful being. I feel truly blessed to have had this experience with you. Thank you so much, Laura. And I'm just going to read one more from Georgie Tilbrook. Quote, my experience with rooted healing was truly wonderful. The ceremonies and additional workshops and sweat lodge, as well as the venue, were profound. There was so much heart, care, and attention put into absolutely everything, from the setting to the ceremonial space, the live sound of music, prayer, and the utterly delicious food that was served all week. This was my first psychedelic experience. I was very nervous, but instantly felt safe and held by the amazing facilitators who clearly hold a huge amount of knowledge, experience, and wisdom working with the sacred fungi medicine. Every day we toasted ourselves, which is in the wood-fired sauna, followed by plunging into the cold water of the lake. Wow, what an invigorating and nourishing feeling this was, being so connected to everyone and everything. I couldn't recommend this enough to people who may be questioning whether to invest in this experience or not. Thank you so much, Georgie. You can read our other testimonials on our website and head to rootedhealing.org/earthmedicine to learn more and apply. We also have space at Forestlings, which is our 4-day fungi, foraging, fires and folklore nestled in an enchanted wooded valley near Bath. A forestling is a word we made up. We decided it's a noun. It stands for creature of the forest, who feasts with earth's rhythms, guardian of the land, and dwells amongst roots, moss, and lichen-filled bark. So yeah, check it out. The accommodation is truly so beautiful. And we have a special chef, Peter Grant, also known as Chippy, rustling up fungi feasts on the open fire. You can see his dribble-worthy food snaps at Treewits on Instagram. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So head to rootedhealing.org/forestlings to learn more. And we'll be announcing all of our 2024 gathering dates in the coming weeks, so make sure you're signed up to our newsletter. I briefly mentioned our online course with Lindsay in this episode, which is our 13-moon slow study, Deepen Your Roots, weaving deep ecology, the work that reconnects, and a folkloric and a mystic exploration into the ecological self rewoven with place. I am so immensely proud of this offering and believe that it is radically able to reshape how we relate with the world and ourselves, and it invites implementable reciprocity action through inner and outer healing of landscapes. So do go and gander at the page, rootedhealing.org/deepen. I'm co-hosting it next year with Ben Stopford, who's a beautiful, wise, fully embodied tender to the wisdom of deep ecology. Register now to save your spot for our next enrollment, which is January. Please do head to our Patreon, by the way, where you can do a 7-day free trial now to explore what's inside. And don't forget to rate and review if these conversations and stories are resonating with you. Okay, here's this wonderful conversation with Lindsay. But this is a new thing I've started doing, which I absolutely love, because especially with the work you're doing, the sense of the ecological self, we often introduce ourselves when we say our name, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself with your name and an aspect of the land that either raised you or that currently makes you. And also if there's a being of some sort that you'd like to weave in spirit into this conversation.
Oh, I really appreciate that question, and it's lovely to be here with you. I'm Lindsay, and I was created and made by the lands that were first stewarded by the Ute people in the Roaring Fork Valley of Colorado. And I really want to call in the geological angles of mountain and deep valley. There are some cut stone in that place that houses and holds waters that are running from the tops of these mountains and bringing life and nourishment to many beings below. And I want to honor and weave in the aspen tree, which has been a kin of mine since probably before I was created, but is certainly a companion and deep ally and partner to me now. And the aspen tree is indigenous to the northern continental part of the so-called United States and is the largest living organism in the world after certain mycelium and fungi. And they grow in these patterns where they are clones of one another, and they exhibit a kind of interconnected, interwoven existence that is contingent on one another biologically, evolutionarily. And they really model, I think, for us what it is to live as if we do belong to each other.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah, may we bring that wisdom of deep interconnectivity into this conversation, which I'm sure is going to be there because your work is utterly enchanting around this. And, this notion of being an eco doula, I really love. I don't know if you coined that or whether that's a thing that lots of people are beginning to move into, but I'd love to ask you the question that you ask. And it's a pretty broad and open question, but maybe you could come from the angle of how we can all sort of step into to becoming an eco doula within our own right, which is how can we seed possibility for new beginnings to take root in the compost of the current decay that is happening?
Yeah, let me trace the notion of eco doula a bit. And I completed a training with the Sati Center for Buddhist Studies, which is in Santa Cruz, and they are coming out of a Buddhist practice and Zen lineage, Mahayana Buddhism, and really interested in how to activate, engage their Buddhist Dharma with what's befalling the world and climate collapse, really within the legacy of Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, who started Plum Village and has been very engaged in eco-activism, and wanting to invite people into weaving the Buddhist principles of non-attachment, non-violence, bodhisattva, compassionate beings with the times that we're in. And so they started training people to become what they call eco-chaplains, and so spiritual caregivers that are at the disposal and companionship of all beings to accompany us in this sixth mass extinction event that we're in. And from a Buddhist lens, that's not necessarily to stop or cease it, which is a very difficult paradox for Westerners to grasp. And it also doesn't reduce the impetus or the urgency of action. So it's both of those tensions on a polarity, holding that together. But I really felt that the word chaplaincy connotes a bit too much of a religious figure, and the word doula to me felt very fitting to the task at hand, being really at its core a type of grief work, a type of palliative care. This is kind of hospice oriented companionship. What we're seeing is the loss and the death of ecological systems at such a rapid rate, as well as the rapid increase of chronic disease, mental health emergency. And some of these things are causally tied and some of them aren't, but they're certainly happening together. And so there is an invitation to all of us to consider what is it to actually be so deeply with this moment and the living beings that are around us. And that might mean being next to the side of a being who's dying. And so what are the qualities? What are the essences and the fragrance and the resonances that are necessary for that type of companionship? It's attunement and presence and receptivity and love and deep care. And so this compost idea I love because, of course, there's the alchemy metaphor and there's this sense of what can we transform it into. And so while yes, and nature is doing this all the time, there's also a little bit of a danger to then get enchanted into the idea that we can just change it then into something better, something more palatable. And we see that, of course, with the kind of wellness mania of individual self-transformation while forgetting the collective.
That's really interesting because I'm almost hearing a closer association with death doula work than actually birth doula work. Obviously, we're talking about transition and what's being brought forth, midwife forth. But the eco grief that can consume people, it's so intense. When it comes to relationship with nature, or even, there's the whole scientific qualification that's happening with nature connectedness, people might think of how much time are we spending outside, or do we enjoy walks in the woods and so on. But something I find really synonymous with our work is taking that relationship to the sensual level, to this sort of deeper intimacy that dissolves self and other. So how has this process unfolded for you, and what led you deeper into this sort of symbiotic discovery of ecophilia to the point of wanting to midwife this connection for others?
Beautiful question. Yeah, I think it's important to kind of reconceptualize what we even mean by past, present, future, as well as death, birth, and rebirth. These are concepts, ontological kind of creations of the mind to put things in categories so that we understand and can kind of take them into our systems in some way. But really, there is no difference between all of these. And from a indigenous lens, from an alternative cosmology, these things are all together. And so when I talk about eco-doula's grief work, that is also birth, that is also rebirth. It's happening kind of at the same moment. And that's the invitation as well, to get out of our addiction to linear time, get out of the trance of progress towards a future goal that is better than where we are at now, that is completely diluted our planet into resource consumption at a pace that the planet cannot sustain. So when we're with death, we are also with birth. We are also with rebirth. But I think the prerequisite requirement to even hold those two other categories even loosely, as we're kind of playing with what time is and isn't, is to first start with death. If we can't be with death, we the rest of the spectrum kind of falls apart and dissolves before our eyes, I think. And so there is a calling forth of something new, but that might be so much more subtle than we think it is. It might not be the grand, end of the glaciers melting. I would love that. But when you talk to people that are deeply immersed in resource restoration or sustainability, coming more from this relational, sensuous lens with the earth, they talk a lot about really listening to what the earth is asking. And over again, they're saying the earth really wants us to witness them in their grief, witness them in what's being lost, and almost not rush the solution. That's a very Western notion as well, to push the answer on the planet. If it was that simple, we wouldn't be here, right? So I think we're kind of playing with things that are very difficult for our minds and bodies to hold alone, which is why we need each other to even be exploring this territory. There is really no map here. We're talking about territories that are very liminal and luminous. So, and that gets me bridging to kind of your second question, which is this sensuous, embodied relationship with Earth that, again, is much more of an indigenous perspective. This isn't something new that we're talking about right now. This is pre-agricultural revolution, pre kind of hunter-gatherer, very much rooted in all parts of the world. And there's a romanticism now, I think, that, we need to return to what other cultures, non-Western cultures, how they lived with Earth. Well, there is that, and there's also a legacy, though, of what it was to be very close to the Earth in the United Kingdom and parts of Europe. This is a birthright of every human being. And these cultures, especially in 16th, 17th century, when we had the rise of the Cartesian dualism split and Enlightenment, these ways of being with the earth just got really forgotten, especially in the West. So what does it mean to connect to nature? And what is the invitation, I think, is very much the exact same as what is the invitation to connect to any human. It is the wild relational web of intimacy, of love, of eros, of trust and closeness and sensation, of being vulnerable to be even wounded or hurt by the earth as well. Relationship contains all of these things, not just the good things. And that's how they these relational containers can change us and shift us because we're willing to be so touched. So that receptivity, the willingness to be vulnerable. And I think that where nature connection research has helped kind of bang the bell, which we really need to be told that being close to nature is good for us? Apparently. But what they have also found is that knowledge does not predict nature connection. Teaching people about nature, the benefits of it, doesn't predict nature connectedness as measured in these psychometric scales, but rather it's about an emotional connection.
So you've written online, which I love, quote, just as the mycelium network, whale song and aspen root system function as one living organism, the chain of the sun's photons, the moon pulling both the oceans and wombed bodies into elegantly parallel cycles shows us we are not islands, as much as Western culture would sell us otherwise. We belong to one another, end quote. I absolutely love this. And I was wondering if you could speak to it and the notion of ourselves as ecosystems within ecosystems interconnected, and how a deepening of this understanding might actually shift our daily perspective, habits, and maybe even social structures.
Mm-hmm. I'm just feeling into, these notions are so there for us and present and available, and yet they are very difficult to fully embody. And there's something that rings true that I do think is romantic and beautiful to people. But something I've been looking at a lot is what helps us translate the beauty, the wonder, the enchantment, and the awe into a deeply embodied, lived, perceptual experience that inextricably motivates and kind of binds us to different ways of being in the world. And there's clearly a massive gap. And, in science, they call it the value action gap. People know about climate change, they don't do anything about it. This notion of we're very paralyzed, it feels very overwhelming. What can one person really do to change a system? And the system is really what's responsible, not necessarily all of us little people, although we're contributing to that, right? But how we got separated and then how we return to connection, every path is needed for how to return. It's like everyone sing your song, blow on your conch shell. Something different will strike each of us differently because we're made so diversely. So while the poetry of that captures you, it might not capture someone else. So yeah, just to say, whatever the path is that feels available to explore or dance or deepen what it is to be connected to the living world, go for it. And try lots of things out. There's also no end to get to or no destination. It's the process. Relationships are processes and mechanisms. There's no end. But all that being said, I think I really am interested in looking at this from a lens of how are our health systems and how do we function as an ecosystem through our bodies. That feels very clear to me, very obvious. The trees are changing carbon dioxide into oxygen. We breathe in oxygen, we emit carbon dioxide, trees breathe that back in. That alone to me is such a stunning picture of how we need the earth. We actually can't breathe. Just to take that in alone. Of course, we can't survive without food and water and all these things that the planet provides, but there's something about the breath because we're doing it unconsciously. It's a gift, it's a necessity. It also is something that we can control. So it's one of the few systems in our body that's both automatic and manipulatable. And then there's this offering of generosity from the trees constantly, despite what we're doing to them. feels to me, really indicative. I think of what this interconnection kind of offers. But then we can go beyond that and kind of look at the body not just as this self-contained skin encompassing an anatomical structure, but how could we imagine the body as an ontological body? So we're a body that's lived, we're a body that's shared. The earth has a body, we're in contact with other bodies. The body does not stop where we think it does. That's a notion of Western civilization. We can think of, for example, sonic forms or wave forms. The world is constantly emitting vibrations. They're coming through from, and I don't mean vibration in like a woo-woo way. I mean actual detectable frequencies that the rain gives off, thunder gives off, leaves give off. Every kind of organism emits a frequency, and those are felt mostly subperceptually by the human body. We have all of these mechanoreceptors throughout our system, in our ligaments, in our blood, in our organs, that detect these things. So we're actually in conversation on a sensory level every second of every day with the living world. What are we hearing? Are we even open to that communication? And could there be a conversation, a dialogue going on actually between us and every living thing if we could, but slow down enough to really listen and tune in to this spell of a opening, really. This is an intelligence. It's inarticulate in a way, but it is comprehensible. And there are qualities and skills, I think, that we can hone as humans to be more available and receptive to the Earth's communication. And a lot of my research really begins that process at the embodied level, something called interoceptive awareness, which is a field of study that is looking at the ability to detect our inner bodily sensations, and science has really used this to predict emotional regulation, emotional awareness, and kind of functioning. And it also can have a maladaptive side where people that are more prone to anxiety, for example, can have their interoceptive awareness kind of turned on too much, can dysregulate. But without the ability to even sense, okay, is there a tightness in my stomach? Is there tingling here? Is there heat? Is there coolness? We miss a lot because that's the language of the earth. The language of the earth is in sensation. It's, some people do kind of hear words or have these mystical experiences with the earth, but I'm talking about something that's available to everybody. You don't have to be spiritual. You don't have to be, a meditator to access. Everyone has access to their own body awareness. And so therefore we have access to communication with the earth.
Yeah, what comes to mind is a lot of imagery with, the reflection of the trees and our lungs, and how the two are the exact same patterns and formations, and also this notion of the nervous system and just the ways our bodies are woven and how much that is reflected in the Gaian body with the mycelial network. I think of mycelium as almost like the neural correlates, but also a dear friend of mine said, well, actually almost like the nervous system. It's this, sensing self mechanism of the Gaian body, which is also threaded, like the fascia tissue between our muscles and all the interconnectivity of our body. And so as you were saying that, I had all this imagery of, the self as very much woven into this greater Gaian body. Your research sounds so interesting. I wouldn't even know necessarily what to ask you specifically, but what are the key things that are unfolding in this process for you? What are you trying to really dig into with your, I guess, what you're hoping to bring to the world?
Yeah, really it is. It's this notion of embodied emotional awareness being the gateway to deep, close, secure bond with the earth. So I'm interested in unpicking what comprises this type of a bond with the earth that is much more along the lines of what we've been speaking to. So this intimate, erotic, pleasurable, close, trusting kind of bond that I'm finding in my research can actually mimic the benefits of a secure relational attachment. So if people are familiar with attachment theory, that came out of research from Bowlby and Ainsworth in the 70s, and the experiments where a child would be taken out of the room and then returned to the room, and how they respond to their primary caregiver, either with anxiety or avoidance or security, has predictive quality for their functioning across the lifespan, including healthy relationships they'll form later in life. So this has become very popularized in psychology now, so most people are familiar with it. And, people are wanting to like, oh, I don't want to date an avoidant or an anxious person or whatever it is. But putting all of that aside and really considering what is the benefit of a secure base or a safe haven, it's everything. It gives a human being the confidence to go out and explore the world and come back to someone that they know is safe. It also gives them an emotional place to, feel at home and anchored and loved and cared for. And what I'm finding is that a bond with nature can actually provide those things, can provide a safe haven, can provide a secure base. So could there then be the opportunity not just to completely reorganize someone's interior world so that their base level experience could be one of safety instead of threat, but that could also spill out into the way they are in their other human relationships, they are with the rest of the world. And from a place of security, we have all kinds of access to the rest of our brain, the rest of our body, for creativity, for love, for goodness, for connection. When we're in hyperarousal and threat, the body's resources shrink because they're going towards what's dangerous, right? So just thinking about it that way, from, okay, how could people have more access to creative solutions to love and care for the earth? They need to feel safe and secure. We're in an entirely unsafe world, in a planet that's spinning, and eventually we will all die. So nothing is actually safe. So, but at the same time, there is the ability to have experiences of safety in the present moment. And of course, those are ephemeral. The present moment is constantly changing. But this has an enormous impact on a brain that can, and a body and a heart and a soul that can be more available to, I think, the type of love, the type of care that's really so needed right now.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and you were talking about the vibrations, the sort of vibrational output of all these natural phenomena and things. And I also just feel one of my favorite, I guess, self-care practices has actually been taking naps outside on the ground. I absolutely love it because I feel like my body receives these just qualities of the earth, the flowers, the wind, the birds flying around in a way that allows me to really reset on a deep, deep level. I think more so perhaps than the meditating. Meditating, I still have to navigate the busy workings of my mind, but sleeping, the mind is given permission to rest as well as the whole body. And
well, that's so beautiful. And you think about that from the lens we were just talking about. You can't sleep unless you feel safe.
Yeah.
Right? So in a way, you're really practicing that safe, secure attachment with the earth by allowing yourself to rest in their arms and to be so held, and to know that you're not in danger enough to trust exposure in a way, by being there and being vulnerable in a vulnerable state. And allowing your sensory awareness and perception to take in things that aren't necessarily cognitive. We don't have to think about this stuff so much or try to understand it, but allow it and be in our experience of it. So I think what you just said is so beautiful.
Yeah, and hearing you respond to that makes me realize, wow, it is a privilege, I've had
Mm-hmm.
access to places my whole life where, apart from living in London, where I've been able to have those safe places in nature where,
Mm-hmm.
for me, like the biggest threat would always be people. Like I wouldn't want to
Mm-hmm.
sleep in a park. but
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, when we do have access to those places, I think that's where the real restful state can happen.
I want to say one thing about that, actually, which is really important. And there is unequal access
Mm-hmm.
to green space, to wild places. And in the United States, for example, Black communities, communities in the South, have unbelievably less access to green space. And that's a determinant of health.
Yeah.
So this is a consequence of environmental racism.
Mm.
This is structural racism. This was done on purpose. And I think it's really important that when we talk about these things, that we really do consider what it is for me to be in a body that has always felt safe outside, not just because I've had green space, but because I haven't had to be concerned that I might be harmed by someone from the general public, or I haven't had to be scared of law enforcement in the United States. If I was in a different body, that might not be the case. And there's also not necessarily it can be very much a white person activity to go camping, to find excitement and nourishment in being outside. That could feel dangerous or scary or very unfamiliar to people in some communities. And that means that they've been severed from their birthright as well. So that's another layer of institutional and structural racism and marginalization, and something that is a justice issue.
Yeah, and it's so huge because, I've invited the founders of the Flock Together movement onto the podcast, which is a movement where people of color go out and bird watch because alone that they haven't felt welcome, they haven't felt safe actually to do so, and this was quite, I hadn't really considered this, which is such a emblem of my privilege. But of course, it makes total sense. I think of the little village where my mum lives, and it's extremely white, middle class. And I can only imagine that if you're of any other community or ethnic minority or whatever that you're walking through, that you're not necessarily going to feel well, especially if you're kind of, I don't know, taking some camping equipment or just in the woods, I don't know, connecting with the trees. If I'm doing that, I'm just some hippie, but I feel like there would be a whole plethora of prejudice for other people doing that, and so it's a huge topic, and it makes me so sad. But I'm really inspired to see these movements where there's this strength in numbers, and it's also such a message to send home to people who, are perhaps
Mm-hmm.
contributing to that disbalance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I interviewed some people in my PhD research who are doing some incredible land-based reconciliation and grief work with Black communities in the rural South of the United States. So looking at this not just as people have been harmed by their separation from nature, people who were forced to labor without pay on these lands, and also these lands have suffered the witness of this violence. So they're really interested in what is it to heal as Black people, and also to be a elixir for the land that's wounded. And so they engage in these really stunning, gorgeous grief rituals with land. So that's another way we're tied. It's not just our health is tied, our goodness is tied, our pleasure is tied, our wounds are tied, our grief is connected. So we need to stop thinking about grief in this way, that only humans could be in possession of. This is something lands also carry.
I truly believe in that too. I feel, especially with the ceremonial work, that grief can really come through from the land sometimes, and we with our human problems don't quite understand what it is. You can't connect it to a specific thing that you're grieving, but you can just feel the land's grief come through, I think.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm.
Yeah, and what are we really talking about here? It's so many of these conversations will just keep weaving back into the
Mm-hmm.
core essence of belonging and the barriers to that. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you think of just the simple act of just cultivating a relationship of belonging with nature, and how actually there are tremendous barriers to it, and more so for certain
Mm-hmm.
groups than others. And so yeah, that's really,
Yeah.
it's really huge. And you've delved deep into such complex, brutal happenings of this world. I mean, really, when we go to, if we allow ourselves to really journey to the places where I think for many people, this paralysis you talked about earlier would really kick in. For me, when I hear about some of the things that are happening in the world, I I feel so sensitive. I feel so fragile in response to it. And you've created films with your Novo Film Company, and award-winning, beautiful projects that are, well, they're just profound, and they're also radical new ways of using film, because they're not for just the watcher. They're for innovative change. They're for preparing communities to help with perspectives, to help with reintegration of traumatized people. And oh, there's so much to go into here. But how have you delved into these stories? How did you find yourself going so deep to the point that you were able to really encapsulate it in this form?
Hmm. Well, I'm glad that you resonate, first of all. Thank you for your words. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about what the power of narrative is, where story is kind of the oldest form of human language in a way. And we've been telling each other stories forever. And some of them have been in images. They were in caves and they were drawings. And, as technology changed, then we had opportunity to tell stories in different ways. That there's verbal storytelling and dance and art. There's every kind of way to transmit story. And we are shaped by them, mostly subconsciously, sometimes consciously. It has an incredible impact in how we function as social groups. What values we hold can determine the trajectory of societies. You look at that in some of its most tragic forms, and what happened, in Europe in World War II. There was a story behind that. There was an ideology, certainly, but there was a story. So stories can heal, they can help, they can kill.
Mm.
And for me, I studied journalism in undergraduate, and so I was really captivated by this synthesis of storytelling and justice and right action. And I got pretty idealistic as a young journalism student. I got to work for the New York Times at the time, had a documentary channel, and I worked with this investigative team that was doing a film as well as a paper investigation on unjust killings that were happening at railroad crossings in the United States. And I was just this little, intern that then became an associate producer, but they would give me the task of calling some of the families that had lost loved ones and ask them questions about what they had experienced, what they had gone through. I could not believe the depth of human connection that was possible in these brief interactions of, I'm on the other line kind of asking someone about what's the most difficult, painful thing they've ever been through in their lives. And it opened my heart, I guess, and my soul to interconnection, really.
Mm.
I didn't know it at the time, but that was what was unfolding. And with that project, the film aired, the paper expose came out, and this railroad company was sued. This paper expose won the Pulitzer Prize that year. There was all of this amazing outfall that happened where people's lives actually were improved by the storytelling we were doing. So that was this early template for me of, oh, okay, look at what can happen if you report the truth. And of course, it's much more complicated than that. And it's taken me now many years, kind of still chasing this idea, I think, of like truth being something objective, and that's now fallen apart completely. But I moved to the Congo when I was 24, and that was my first job. I was a photographer and writer with a human rights organization there. And it just didn't take me very long to see through the veil of this journalism kind of mythos of tell people stories and good things will happen for them. I was in a country where the deadliest war since World War II, communities had been promised many things by international people and had those promises broken. And I was kind of another person to be asking someone to give me the depths of their trauma, really, without any promise that something meaningful would flow back to them. And I just felt like I couldn't do that anymore ethically. It was participation in another kind of extraction. And and there was a little boy that I had been following for 2 years who had been in and out of various rebel groups and was trying to come back to his community. And I was sitting with him in his home, this little home. He'd been gone for 2 years. All he wanted was for his community to welcome him back with open arms and care about what he had been through. And instead, he was in this little room crying because no one understood, and people were scared of him. They thought that he had been cursed or worse. And it was so obvious to me that the people that needed to know what he had been through were not people like me or people in the West. It was people in his village. And so this circular storytelling idea of stories for the community kind of came through in that experience, and learning from other organizations like Search for Common Ground, who had been doing it's called mobile cinema for a long time and doing it really, really well. So I became, really committed to seeding stories and working with communities in a collaborative way so that the power of narrative and social change could come from the ground up instead of from the outside in.
Yeah. Wow. It's so powerful. I watched several of your films. They came at night, which is, I feel like, the one you've just been referring to in terms of its inspiration with the Lord's Resistance Army in Central Africa with gosh, it's just utterly harrowing, but there is this real sense of hope that there is actually something that's happening, and that the communities how did they receive the film?
So They Came at Night is still being screened, and we shot that film in 2013. So that's 10 years, which unfortunately there is still the Lord's Resistance Army out there. And for those who aren't familiar with this conflict, look it up. I won't go into it in full detail, but abducting children and forcing them to fight, and led by a charismatic leader named Joseph Kony. And that name might be familiar to people. But our partner organization, Invisible Children, has been screening this in community. Tens of thousands of people have seen it now, and it's enabled and helped facilitate hundreds of peaceful defections, meaning someone choosing to leave the Lord's Resistance Army, but to come home and not be killed when they return, because these children are victims of violence and then forced to perpetuate it. And there's community-led reconciliation programs and justice programs to deal with the complexities of forgiveness and reintegration in a way that is right for them and can generate sustained peace. There's been improvement in mental health, conditions and difficulties. When you think about the ubiquity of trauma, that's become a very popularized notion now. But in a place like this, where people have certainly survived traumatic events and they might have what are called trauma symptoms, but there is no mental health service at the level that is scaled to have individualized kind of mental health treatment. So it's community-based care that still sees a reduction in these symptoms or these challenges that disrupt their daily life. And so to me, I mean, that's everything. It's, can kids come back home? Can they have access to a different future? Can they go back to school? And can communities move on? And that is happening, which is amazing. And in this area, people had never seen a film. A lot of people had never seen a film at all. So there's no electricity and much less seen a film in their language. So in the Congo, there's 300 plus languages. And we shot the film in one of those local languages called Zonde. So it's also just fun. People come, they see themselves in the film. It's a tough topic, but people get to talk about it and process it. You know, these screenings have all this facilitation.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh gosh. Yeah. It's so powerful. And so were the actors locals? Like they, as in, are they acting professionally normally?
No. Yeah. We work with all first-time actors.
Wow.
And they're people that are just living in the community. So we have a casting call and, 150 people come and we pick based on that. And it's been so fun to do these in different parts of the world. So India, Central African Republic, Congo, Ghana, Tanzania, and there's talent everywhere, everywhere. And the beauty too is people are acting roles that are quite close in some ways to their real life. So of course they're bringing that to bear. But I did a trauma drama therapy training years ago. And so I bring that in as well, because this is very sensitive and people are activated and kind of brought back into difficult memories themselves. But just the process of creating the film is therapeutic and very bonding and beautiful of an experience. I mean, we're a family, and then they get to see themselves like all over the place doing something good for their community. It can feel like alchemy as well. And like they're turning what they went through into something meaningful.
Oh, it's so incredible. It's so incredible. It's inspiring. And I hope that we all can find our way to bring story, narrative, whatever it is that we are all individually passionate about, that we can find ways to weave it in such an interconnected way. I mean, you have such a wellspring of work that you are putting out into the world. What would your advice be to people like me or anyone who's listening who, want to do more, but are faced with just the complexity of everyday life, and also, acknowledging privilege, but also survival, living costs are so high. And I don't know, I just would love to hear some words of wisdom of how to go for it, how to leap into these realms of connection.
Yeah, it's tough because I don't want to paint a picture that you have to have, started a film company or a nonprofit or something that takes up your entire life in order to do good. So maybe we can demystify that. Mother Teresa said, it doesn't matter how small an action is. If it's done with love, it's so meaningful. So every act of kindness and love matters, and especially the ones that are unseen. So whether that's picking up trash on your road that you live on and just being committed to that, or saying hello to the trees where you live and starting a relationship with them, it can be things like this. Also consider where you are. There are social issues in every part of the globe. So I am certain that wherever you happen to live, there's people that could really use support. So think about what makes your heart moved, and consider exploring what it would be to actually put values together with action and show up. Like there really isn't, honestly, no excuse. And the interviews that I did for my PhD, one after the other, they would say the same thing. Like, if you want to help the world, just do it. pull a dead branch off the side of the street, go volunteer with a charity, do something. We all have, an hour a week to spare. And yes, there are incredible demands on our finances and our time. But I think if we go the path of being swept up by the current of the modern pace of life, yeah, of course, then we'll have nothing left to give. But start small, start doable, and further along, I think for me, I don't know, like I just really wanted to give myself fully. And for me, that has taken a certain trajectory, but also following those little inclinations. So for example, I really started becoming interested in this earth connection piece, but it was still very nascent. And then I found the Sati Center for Buddhist Studies, and it was this sense of resonance in me. And also, I don't know, do I really have time to do this? I'm in my PhD. This probably is a bad idea, but something in me was like a yes. So I think we have to learn to find our yeses and tune those yeses to goodness. And that's a practice I think that's can be pulled from spiritual values, times in stillness, really going within and listening to yourself of what matters to you, and then aligning that with how you live your life.
Totally. I want to speak to you more about this probably outside of the podcast, but I'd so love for you to come on as a guest on our Deepen Your Roots journey, because it's designed to deeply weave people into the local bioregion and then find those things there. But yeah, I want to come to your book that's just been signed, Heartwood, weaving body and erotic ecology back together into the music of our sensuous embodied birthright to interbelong with all living things. This sounds like a wonderful encapsulation of everything that you've been sharing. But is there anything you'd like to add about your book, and when can we expect it? And
I'm so excited. It's so interesting because I really have done a lot in my life that I love, and I feel so grateful. None of it has been alone. There's been so many people working on all these projects, like so many, dozens and dozens. This has taken massive amounts of hearts. It's not just mine, but ever since I was a little girl, I've always wanted to write a book. That's been my one real lasting, enduring dream. And so it feels really lovely that that's happening now. And and the book is a deep exploration of kinship with trees, earth in a broader sense, of course, but really traces how trees healed me during a period of my own chronic illness, and then what that really taught me about the process of deep intimacy and relationality with them, and then widening that into kind of themes we've been talking about. How does that affect our cosmology and worldview? How does that affect intersectional justice and how we show up in the world, and sacred reciprocity, for example? But it's really fun. It's we use spirituality, science, philosophy, pulling really from my mystic Christianity upbringing, as well as my now Buddhist practice, to offer people kind of a guide, really, of how to create the type of relationship with the earth that's been so meaningful to me, and I know for you and so many others. And so this is kind of one entry point for people to explore.
It sounds amazing, and I don't know if you feel spacious enough to, or safe enough to, but would you mind sharing a little bit more about that process? Like, what was the illness? And I don't know. I want to know a little bit more about that.
So starting in the pandemic, right early on, so March, kind of April 2020, I started getting a constellation of symptoms that really didn't have a clear diagnostic explanation, but became increasingly debilitating to my life, to the point where I had to step back from my PhD, and I was getting, severe migraine headaches like 4 or 5 times a week that would last for a couple of days at a time. I was having periods of like where I would black out. My cognitive function was declining drastically. All kinds of weird symptoms. So I don't even want to go into all of them. One of the most strange, though, was a onset of inner tremors. So I started having inner tremors that would happen mostly at night and keep me really awake. Again, there was really no explanation. I had every test you could have, and I did get diagnosed with an autoimmune illness, but it still didn't really, explain what I was living through, nor was there a clear solution. And for anyone who lives with an autoimmune illness, like you know this very well, there are some pharmaceutical treatments for some of them, but a lot of them are quite mysterious, and they affect women more than men.
Yeah.
And there's definitely, I believe, a very strong gut-brain connection of how these happen. So we could have a whole other conversation about chronic illness and various healing modalities that can be very helpful. But I think what became the most helpful, and I'm a proponent of do what works for you. I'm not against Western medicine by any means. And there was aspects of that really were supportive to me, but it was my relationship with trees. So I would basically, in these days of feeling so unwell, where, I was in despair. I would cry all the time. I couldn't work. Could barely function. I would have to take like 5-6 naps a day. I'm somebody that was in the Congo making films and very, very high achieving. I don't mean that in my achievements are so great sense. I just meant I was able to sustain hours of work that I no longer could. And on these days of lostness and kind of dissolution and disconnection from my sense of self, my sense of reality, it would be these trees that would start kind of calling me and pulling me into relationship. And I really didn't have a relationship like this with nature before. I grew up in Colorado and California, so of course I love the beauty of nature, but I didn't have an interpersonal, secure attachment to nature in the way that this catalyzed. So this illness and this sickness catalyzed a willingness to listen to the more than human world, basically. And my defenses just weren't there anymore because there was a sense of desperation. I didn't know if I was going to really survive it.
Because I've been, I've had an apprenticeship with autoimmunity from a very young age, and only in the past year and a half have I really feel like I'm healing it. I've been able to come off medication and really work with my diet and lifestyle and connection. So I'd love to know because you talked about this, like being given the label didn't really help because they're still just, it's just, our tendency to name things so we feel like we understand them, but actually they remain incredibly mysterious and complex. And, but I'd be curious, what was it? What was the label?
Yeah, I have, I still have it. Autoimmune hypothyroidism.
Okay, that's what
Hashimoto's.
Yeah.
And diagnosed with chronic migraine. And, but I had other autoimmunity biomarkers and antibodies that didn't fit some of the other autoimmune categories.
Yeah.
I was a toxic mold. There's all of these other ones as well that can show up in the blood, but I don't know, to be honest. I do live with a thyroid condition and I care for it. I take supplements. Yeah. I don't eat certain things. Like I'm not saying that you don't have to. I do. And I saw so many doctors. I had MRIs. I had every kind of test. And I really think that Hashimoto's and migraine and the female menstrual cycle are very connected. in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mine's Graves' disease, so we're
Oh,
thyroid
okay. Yeah.
sisters.
Yeah. I mean, it affects your whole body, right?
It's yeah,
It's
it's like that butterfly shaped gland that actually is the heart of almost all the functions, you know. It's it's quite the initiation into trying to understand wellness, trying to understand the body as an interconnected system. So
yeah.
really feeling resonance with your story there. And
Mm.
there's one final thing. Well, there's a few final things. I just really want to be friends with you and speak to you all the time. Um, but
Perfect.
this, yeah, I guess there's one thing I feel like I've sort of skirted over, and we obviously don't have much time now, but this notion of eroticism with the natural world, I feel like we haven't really gone into that, you know,
Yeah.
eros,
Yeah.
and that's it's juicy. I kind of want to hear you speak to that.
I know. Okay. Yes. I want to speak to it because it is so juicy. It's everything. Yeah. I love the word because people immediately are like captivated by it, right? Because it's like a little bit sexy or a little bit taboo, but, and it is those things. But when I say the erotic, what I really mean is pulling from an Audre Lorde feminist scholar kind of definition, which is aliveness. So when we're talking about the erotic, it's like the full capacity for all of our alive, sensibilities to awaken and be online in such a way that we're connected to the drive. You know, when the erotic is also speaking to this drive towards, and not just a sexual drive, but a drive towards aliveness. And so this falling forward, moving towards being attracted. And I think that can enliven and deepen our relationship with nature so much. Doesn't have to be this very kind of pedestrian, like, oh, look at this pretty tree. This is so nice. Let me just be admiring this like picture painting. It's like, no, let's get intertwined. It's fermented, it's juicy, it's fermenting. Like, let me touch it. Let's mingle our juices, you know? Let me like press my face on your face and feel your skin. And this is contact close, not just a very kind of restrained way of being with one another. And the more like I am in touch with my aliveness in myself, the more I can feel the draw towards the earth. So it kind of starts with our connection to body and self and our own erotic aliveness before we can kind of be in touch with it. But it's a circle. It's like constantly like going back and forth and broadening and building on itself. So, and this like availability, like, oh, it's like a courtship, right? So you're out there, you're outside, and you're like, oh, where am I being kind of drawn? Where do I feel a little seduced? Where am I kind of being like, ooh, come over here? Let yourself be in that coy dance of pressure and release, of pursuer and kind of like resistor, and like see what happens. It's fun. And it allows an aliveness to kind of bubble up. So erotic ecology really is like a commitment to aliveness in all ways. And there are people that take this into a more literal sense. So ecosexuality, which was coined by Annie Sprinkle, and she's all about sex partnership with earth and even orgasming and kind of climaxing with place. So this could include that. It doesn't have to, though. And even it can be erotic for someone who has a wombed body to even lay your womb on the earth. This is a type of intimacy, and a lot like, ooh, I'm connecting like this place that generates aliveness, you know, metaphysically and kind of mythically. What is it to place that on the earth and kind of feel into these centers? So that's a practice that I think can kind of challenge or disrupt or sort of kind of give a taste of this. How basic is this magic? Really, it's like,
yeah, I love that. It's something I deeply enjoy exploring just, the fully sensuous capacity that we have with the natural world. I think of mossy banks and flowing rivers and warm rocks, and just like how you can actually connect your body with so much pleasure, just lying on a warm rock in the sun and becoming more rock-like, feeling the softness of your body. These are the kind of moments that I think, for me, feel quite erotic, like just quite sensuous and fully pleasurable, and also being able to recognize in the natural world the shapes and the expressions that do also remind me of our erotic nature, our co-creational nature. I love it when I see things that I'm like, oh, I have that shape on my body. and I am the same thing. Like, we share the same genes, and how, we're sisters, we're ancestors, whatever.
Like letting yourself be turned on. A lot of Western modern life is this anesthetizing of our aliveness and addiction to screens and purchasing things and consuming. Like, that's not aliveness. So being enchanted and alive, and finding back our way into this birthright earth belonging is so powerful and so beautiful and so precious, and so there. It's available all the time. It's just like waiting for us.
Yes. And I just want to add the beautiful poem that you shared on your website from Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Quote, "May you taste the fresh and the salt water of yourself, and know what only you can know. May you live in the mouth of the river, meeting place of the tides. May all blessings flow through you." Oh, so beautiful.
So good. Yeah, her book is amazing. Everyone should buy it. It's called Undrowned. It's absolutely stunning.
Oh, what a lovely resource to end on. And then I also just want to quote you from your website as sort of final words for this. You've written, "I look to the lichen, the whale, and the turtle dove. They are not safe from humans, fossil fuels, or a warming planet, and yet they go on anyways. Even as they face disappearance, they sing, love, fly, grow. If they can, we must." So beautiful.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation.
I wish you well. I wish you well.
Thank you for being here with the Rooted Healing community. Through deepened imagination, consciousness expansion, and cross-cultural wisdom exchange, we explore human soul ecology to ignite collective healing, nature awe, and interconnectivity. We offer nature-immersive ceremonial gatherings, legal and safe psychedelic-assisted psilocybin retreats, integrative healing courses, and a growing collection of resources rooted in regenerative reciprocity. Visit rootedhealing.org to learn more. Please do consider joining our Patreon community, where you can gift forward and support our work in exchange for bonus material, book and gift giveaways, meditations, workshops, episode transcripts, community discussion, and discounts to our events. Your monthly contribution, which can be as little as £2 a month, helps us cover the costs of running the show, and our hope is to gather enough gifting community to really go the extra mile with this show and its purpose. Come follow us on Instagram at Rooted Healing Co, or find us on the various platforms you tune into. And don't forget to rate and review the show if these stories and conversations are touching you. It's a beautiful act of reciprocity. Thank you.
I wish you joy. I wish you joy. Now I know the way your eyes searched for mine. You were just a...
The music in this episode was gifted by Mike Howe and Kiara Gilmore. Thank you so much for enriching this episode with your creations. If you'd like to gift your music to the Rooted Healing podcast, please reach out to us via the link in the show notes. I'm your host, Veronica Stanwell. Thanks for listening.